Hi there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 3 in the Weeds, Episode 7, the 16 ways you're destroying trust with your buyer and the 4 ways to counteract that with an antidote. My name is Becc. I'm going to be the guide for you throughout this session. If you do me a favor and you would go ahead and go to flipthescript.co, on the left-hand side, if you would click Free Sales Training Hub, click Season 3 and download the deck for Episode 7. So it just requires a business email and it is free of charge. So you can have the deck along with you at each step of the way. That would be really helpful. Once you've done that, if we go ahead and we can jump on in. So first, I wanted to start with defining trust. So what is trust? What are all the components of it? And how can we be sure that we don't blow that with our buyer? So trust is going to be defined as having a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of something. So it's not just about that you're telling the truth for someone to trust you. They're also trusting that you can, that you have an ability or an expertise that they don't have, and that you can reliably deliver whatever you said that you could. So when it comes to blowing trust and eradicating trust with your buyer, Brigham Young did a study on all the ways of how you can effectively do that. And they walked away with the top 8 ways to blow trust with, not only trust with your buyer, but also with anyone in general in your life. The first and number 1 way is to exclude them. So circumvent them, go around them, exclude them from a conversation, and not include them within the dialogue is the fastest way to blow trust with your buyer or with any person in your life in general. Number 2 is withholding information, not telling them a complete story and all of the information in hand. Number 3, having an alternative agenda. Meaning, if you have an agenda underneath the hood that is different from whatever you're stating the agenda is, which is going to come up in quite frequently in sales, that this is the third most effective way to eradicate trust with your prospective buyer. Number 4, not saying what you're thinking or your true feelings in the situation. Number 5, lying. Number 6, not doing what you said you would do. 7 is hostility. And 8 is not having trust in them. So you would think that lying would be higher up the list, or at least I did. But it actually come to know that the top 3 ways, or top 4 ways above that, is if you go around your buyer, if you have one internally, withhold any kind of information from them, like is something on the product roadmap, can you effectively discount? Do you have the products or features that you said that you have? Do they actually perform? What about all of the case studies, not just the case studies that are where you did well? If you withhold any information, that's the second most effective way. Having an alternative agenda, for instance, of if you have the agenda to sell someone instead of just truly understand what's going on in their organization and help them by way of diagnosing a problem, that's the third most effective way. And not saying what you're thinking or your true feelings. These are all going to be more effective at completely eradicating trust with your buyer than just dead on lying to them. So when it comes to keeping trust with our buyer, there's a number of different ways where I see this eroded within the prospecting genre. So I want to first go into what are all the typical traits of a salesperson that come to mind, and then we can go into all of the ways that you're hitting that pattern of a salesperson and inherently blowing trust in the meantime. So the traits of a salesperson. Whenever you think of a salesperson, what comes to mind? Now I'm going to pause for a second and you can answer it to yourself or out loud, if you're watching this at home. But typically the traits that I hear of a salesperson are that they're sleazy, that they're pushy, that they always have their own agenda, that they'll sell you stuff you don't need, they're aggressive, they always only show up when there's something in it for them. But I went on a search and there were 42 different definitions of sales, and 41 of them were negative. Snake oil salesman, is a great example, or car salesman, but inherently negative traits came up whenever I was searching for sales. And the 42nd definition wasn't positive, it was neutral. So we have a pretty negative agenda, or a negative reputation. So I have to ask the question, why? Why is there an inherent relationship of mistrust already in the box between a buyer and a seller? Why is there this relationship of mistrust? So usually with a systemic relationship going wrong, it's going to be something with a setup or a KPI system, not the person or character of the person within the role. So I took a step back and I thought to myself, what are the goals of a buyer? What is a buyer really after in this situation? So I was very intrinsic on Eric Berne's work. He wrote a number of great books, but he's a psychologist back in the 60s. And a book that really blew my mind was Games People Play. And in this book, he goes into a number of different things, one of which is that we have 3 ego states. But a second thing was that there was an inherent amount of games that people play between one another whenever they're within a role. And he posited within his work that buying and selling was an example of a game. And that's why people love to buy, but hate to be sold to. Right? It's because it's a game. And in a game, people are opponents are at after a goal that are mutually exclusive of the other person's goals. And so they withhold information in the process. So buying and selling, the reason people love to run the credit card or buy something, but they don't like being sold to, is they know that whenever they are being sold by someone, that they essentially, it is mutually exclusive to their goal. But if they're buying standalone, it isn't necessarily. So the goals of a buyer are typically going to be the following: to solve their problems, buy the fewest amount of products to do that, buy products at the lowest ticket item, and buy the products at the lowest ticket item relative to the other people who are buying the item. The goals of a seller, however, are going to be to sell the most frequently, to sell to the most companies within their TAM, to sell the biggest deal sizes, to sell that at the highest ticket item, and to sell all of the products that they can in every situation. Why? Because their KPI is quota attainment. So as a buyer, I want to buy the fewest products at the lowest ticket item. As a seller, I want to sell the most products at the highest ticket item. So make no mistake, there is a war between buyer and seller. There is a war between buyer and seller. There is no overlap that achieves all of the seller's goals and achieves all of the buyer's goals as well. The seller wants to buy at the lowest price, or a seller wants them to buy at the highest price, and the buyer wants to buy at the lowest price. So you can't buy something for $80 that was sold at $100. So this is why there is a toxic relationship between these two parties, is because regardless of who you are as a person or your character, the buyer knows that you are KPI'd in a way that you want to sell more things to them than as possible, as many things as you can as possible at the highest ticket item. So we're going to withhold some information in the meantime as a result of that. So a couple of examples of the information that a buyer will withhold: do they have any true intention of buying your product? When do they plan on buying? Are they the decision maker? How much budget do they truly have? This is a big one. What needs to happen internally? Are they evaluating your competitors? What plans do they have internally for initiatives? What problems do they have? And facts about their business. So all's fair in love and war until number 8. Our buyers, because they are smart, are withholding pain and problems and facts about their business, because they know that we as a seller can leverage that against them to sell them more frequently and also sell at a higher ticket item. So we know the laws of supply and demand. If someone really needs something and they don't have a lot of alternatives, then I can hike up the price and I don't have to discount. So the definition of power is the ability to behave in a certain way, meaning if I have the ability to either take this deal or leave it, then I have all of the power in the situation. If I only have this person that I can buy from, all of a sudden my power spikes down because I have to have this item. So our buyers are withholding this information in the process, which would be okay if all of our prescriptions, meaning what we're prescribing to our buyers, weren't based on the problems that they are running into and how we can solve for those effectively. So this is the information that I, as a buyer, would withhold from someone as a seller so I could have my best interests. A seller, in the same token, is also going to withhold information. Does the product actually work? Does the person actually need that feature? Is it in the prospect's best interest to buy something? What are the typical results from a product? Meaning, not what are the case study results, but what are the average results? What are people typically seeing? So anyone can give me a couple of good references, but what's typically going on, with this product? Is something truly on the roadmap? What's the list price? How much can they discount? How much of the product is available? So I've seen a number of different end of quarter discounts, and all you're doing is broadcasting to your buyer two things. Number one, that you have no real clue why they would buy. And number two, that you could have discounted the whole time, but that you chose to wait out until they made a move. So this is going to notch the lack of trust even higher, because they know now that you had that discount the whole time, but you didn't offer it to them until you weren't getting the sale from them. So they know that you don't inherently have their back. Heaven forbid you honor the end of quarter discount after the new quarter starts. So these are just reinforcing the narrative to the buyer that they cannot trust you. They cannot trust you. That is their default. Their default is that 99% of the time, what they have seen with sellers in their experience, that they cannot trust them. So I'm going to go into a number of ways that I have seen this trust be blown before, but I have to ask the question, why do we struggle with that people don't view sales in a positive light? We struggle with, not all salespeople are bad, and not all salespeople will lie, and not all salespeople have an agenda. And I'm like, in most cases, we do. So you have to fight that narrative. How you can really fight that narrative is by being the change in the room, not being a typical salesperson that will oversell them, will withhold the truth from them, and will have their back whenever they're selling. So the toxic pattern number one, that is going to be the most toxic pattern that that you can have within the selling process in general, is they see you as a prospector and they see themselves as a buyer. So if they see you within this role, again, all of the traits that come to mind for a salesperson, sleazy, agenda-driven, pushy, etc., if they see you as a prospector, then all of these things are traits, whether they're true or not, are going to flood into their brain. So 16 ways and examples that I see trust eroded within the prospecting process. Let's put aside for the second that you need to be thinking about, from my perspective at least, and I go into this, I believe, in episode 4 on the Zeigarnik effect and 3 patterns that you need to interrupt. I go really deep on that topic, but here's a list of 16 things that I see that reinforces the narrative for the prospect that you are not someone that they can trust. So we're going to go into it for prospecting, and then we're going to go into it for selling. So the first one is misleading voicemails. These are voicemails that I've heard reps leave that say like, "Hey, this is Becc. Call me back." And they don't give any other information. And sales reps will say like, "I get a lot of callbacks all the time." And I'll say, "Okay, so what's the problem?" They're like, "Well, they're not converting." And I'm like, "Tell me the voicemail that you're leaving." And they tell me something like that. I'm super vague. I say, "This is Becc, call me back." And I say it in this tone. I'm like, "Let me ask you a question here. If you were to get that voicemail, what would you think?" They usually respond, "I would think I'm in trouble." So I would call them back. I'm like, "Cool. So you do get the call back. But now imagine, let's say I were to say something like, hey, this is Becc from Baylor Medical. You need to call me back immediately. And then you called me back and I said, hey, so I actually want to talk to you about your software needs on X, Y, and Z. I said, what would be your feeling in that moment? They said, I would be irate. Usually they'll say, I would be furious. I'm like, well, why would you be furious? They're like, because you actually wanted to pitch me about a software. You didn't want to talk to me anything about Baylor Medical. And I'm like, you're not doing that dead on, meaning you're not mentioning that you're from Baylor Medical, but your tone makes it sound like you are. So if you leave a voicemail that's super vague and you're like, this is Becc, you need to call me immediately back at 214, XYZ, then the person's going to call you back thinking that it's something super urgent. So if you are selling them anything, it doesn't matter how many callbacks you're getting, they're going to be irate because you have misled them. You have duped them right off the bat. So I'm going to go into a lot of these prospecting behaviors, but I get a lot of pings from reps asking, like, what do I do in this situation after when my prospects aren't booking meetings with me? I'm like, it's very simple. Stop doing this stuff that's misleading them. Like you can't reinforce a narrative right off the bat that they can't trust you like they already think about salespeople. You have to fight that in the sales cycle, not reinforce it. The second example is re-subject lines. I see this a lot of like, well, it increases open rates. I'm like, it increases open rates because people think that it's a reply when it wasn't. So is that honest? They're like, no. I'm like, then why are you sending it? I get it that it's going to be an open, but the minute that they find out that it wasn't a reply, you're going to 10x how difficult it is to book a meeting with them. Because now they think even like you have to 10x the relevant of like, you need to be selling something that they have to have because you just blew trust with them. So these are small items, but again, they're small items right at the beginning. So they're broadcasting a narrative that you are someone not to be trusted. Intro subject lines. I've seen this a lot of people will say intro blank and blank and make it feel like to the buyer that they are, that someone is being introduced, they are introducing them to a potential client. So again, we'll get an email open, but once they figure out that you are being dishonest, the best case scenario that you can hope for in this, people sometimes will say, well, I got meetings. I'm like, what do the meetings pan out like? And they're like, they seemed a little confused. I'm like, they took the meeting for the wrong reason. So I'd always be clear with what I want. Iron fist in a velvet glove, but you need to be clear with what you want. Otherwise, you're not winning. You're not winning if you get someone on the line by way of confusion. I see subject lines that say confirming an appointment when they haven't set a discovery call with someone. They say confirming an appointment. So the prospect opens it up thinking that they must have put an appointment with someone and forgotten about it. So again, your prospect finds out about this, you just churn rapport with them. Personalizing without a hook. I see this a lot. I'm a huge advocate for personalization. I'm probably the number one advocate for personalization. I've taken it in the teeth for personalization more than I care to admit. But if you personalize without a hook, then you essentially are like, hey, Becc, I noticed you went to Texas A&M. We over here at Oracle help X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, there's no hook. So it's manipulative. So I would you always have to have a hook. So if you go into personalization point, I go very deep into hooks, but you should have a hook to what you are selling if you're personalizing. Mentioning you have mutual connections whenever you aren't mutually connected to that person or you don't know the person. 99.9% of the time out of their LinkedIn connections, if you mention someone in specific, they don't know the person, they haven't worked with the person, and even if they have worked with the person, you still have the question mark of do they respect them? Do they respect them and respect their opinion? So now we're dwindled down even lower. But let's say that all that is true, which, to be very freaking clear, it usually is not. 99.9% of the time. Let's say they worked with the person, they respect the person, they know the person that you mentioned. You mentioned to me Keenan. You're like, hey, Keenan, I'm connected with Keenan too. The first thing that I'm going to do, I want you to almost guess in your head. The first thing I'm typically going to do, if I find value in the email, is I'm going to call Keenan. And I'm going to say, hey, do you know this person? And he's going to go, no, not really. And the relationship's over. So mentioning mutual connections, unless you know that person, great way to blow trust with your buyer if you're looking to do it. Not mentioning the AE handoff of like, I've booked a time with someone, and then I'm going to hand this off to another AE. And then all of a sudden, this person, you got to keep in mind their buyer's journey. They were talking to you, you built rapport with them, you didn't even let them know. And all of a sudden on this discovery call is someone completely different that doesn't know them at all, that probably hasn't read up on the person, who doesn't know anything about the prospecting calls that happened beforehand. And you didn't let them know about it. You just bait and switched. So again, they're smaller items, but not really. You're really, everything you do in those first couple weeks is very, very important. Asking someone about their content, if asking about their content wasn't the goal. So I see this a lot. People will be like, hey, I saw you wrote this article. People bring this to me all the time. So I personalize this person. I'm like, what'd you personalize on? And they're like, that they wrote an article. I'm like, cool. So they went back and forth. They asked the prospect things about their article, got the prospect talking, and they're like, where do I go from here? How do I sell them? I'm like, you can't. You blew it. It's over. Go to the next prospect. They're like, why? There's no way to reposition? I'm like, the minute you do, guess what they're going to be thinking? They're going to be thinking, oh, so you just reached out to me to talk to me about my content so that you can sell me. Disingenuous. So I'm like, it's over. Go to another prospect. You need to be clear right off the bat with what you want. If you want something, do it in a very appropriate way. Put a push-pull on the end, but you need to be very clear about what you want. Otherwise, it's confusing to them, best case scenario. Calling twice, I've seen this as a culprit. People, called 2 or 3 times, so it makes the person think, well, the first call, it probably wasn't important, but if they're calling me twice, it is important. Oh my gosh, this list is exhausting me almost. Following up on people who are following up on content. Someone downloads content and you're like, hey, saw you downloaded content. I'm here to answer any questions about the content. These tactics, guys, like, again, I have been taught them. I've, in some cases, I am ashamed to admit, done them. And every time I'm like, they're going to be in such a bad headspace. And they are. Of like saying like, hey, I noticed you downloaded the content. Yeah. Did you have any questions? No. Okay. And then the rep will ask me like, how do I reposition that? I'm like, you don't. You made it sound like you were just there to see if they had any questions with the content. The best case scenario is they believed you. Best case scenario. Let's say they did, which should be very clear. They probably didn't. But let's say that they did for a second. Now, if you try to fox in the hen house and sell them something later, they're going to see straight through it. They're just going to question, why did you originally reach out? So if you say you're following up on content, great way to do this is, reason for my outreach is I noticed you downloaded this content, but more importantly, transition to something about them in terms of personalization and hook that in the second line. Go for the CTA in the third line and then push-pull in the back end. You have to include what you want in the conversation. Saying you spoke to someone internally whenever you didn't get their consent to do this, I see this happen very frequently. Every single team I've worked with, I've seen this happen 2 or 3 times where they talk to someone internally and the person's like, yeah, I'm not the right person. They go find the right person and they're like, me and Blake just talked. So again, the person, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to reach out to Blake and be like, hey, so you sent this girl my way. And they're like, no, I didn't. I think I talked to that person for like 2 seconds. People talk internally. Who you are matters. Words matter. They matter. They matter. They matter. They matter. It's not about techniques or tricking people. Like, you do this and it's over. Localized area codes, we got to stop doing this shit too. Of like, I get a lot of area code calls from 214 because I'm from Dallas and my number's 214. What's the problem with that? I live in San Francisco. So I get a 214 area code. Sometimes I'll pick up because I'm like, I'm on a rant. Hey, there's blank calling from blank. I'm like, let me ask you a question. Where are you based? Boston. Then why the hell do you have a 214 area code? Because, well, it's in our CRM. I'm like, look, I'm not mad at you. You got to tell your leader that you just blew rapport with me. Because why would you put a localized area code? to say that you're from the same area as me when you're not. So localized area codes, gotta go. Saying you were impressed by someone when you don't mention exactly what you were impressed by, and that doesn't hook to what you want. So I see this very generically. There's a lot of generic messages that look personalized, but they're not truly personalized. And I'm like, just tell the truth. Just tell the truth. And if you don't, at minimum, my ask is, if you don't tell the truth, then stop complaining that buyers see salespeople as bad people. If we're going to do these things, they're correct. So don't wonder why they see us as sleazy, because I'm like, if we're doing this, it's sleazy. It's manipulative. It's misleading. So I was impressed by, your background or your profile, making the person feel like you know exactly who they are. Sometimes just for the hell of it, I'll respond and be like, what were you impressed by? I'll get ghosted for 4 days, even though I'm a potential meeting, right? Because they weren't impressed by anything in specific. And I'm like, okay, so what is the ask here? My CEO sent me your way. I've researched your company. Stop saying that you're not like every other person. Just be not like every other person. Instead of saying you've researched someone's company, research their company and mention in detail and prove it, or don't say it if it's not the truth. I am begging us of like, we want to have sales make a pivot. This is the table stakes. This is table stakes, not doing these things. My manager needs an update on this account. Would you please? Does your manager? I want to talk to them. Do they really in specific want an update on my account? Again, these are ways to look personalized but not truly be personalized. All 16 of these are behaviors within sales that are again, right off the bat, and it like your tail sticking out. They know it. They know that these are not the truth. So toxic pattern number 2 is going to be they see you as a seller and they see themselves as a buyer. So it's a different slant. It's different than the prospecting proclivity. This is going to be within selling in specific. So 16 ways you're breaking trust in selling. Not telling them when you can't do something. This is a big one. I value when I can't do something and I get to tell my prospect about it, because I can hallmark to them that I am in their corner and that I'm going to tell them things even when they're disadvantageous to me. Not telling them things that they need to watch out for. This is a big one. I will tell you, one of the things that I marker on within every deal for Flip the Script, I'm like, let me say some stuff before people sign. I'll say, let me tell you about a couple of things that you're going to run into on the back end if we do decide to move forward together. X, Y, and Z. So I need you to be aware of these. If you were if you're going to sign, you need to sign aware of these things. Otherwise, I don't feel comfortable with you moving forward. So it's going to come down to adoption. That's going to come down to accountability. Here's a couple of the hiccups that are going to happen. Here's how I solve for them. But here's some of the expected things that are going to happen. So usually when I do that process, you would think that people will say like, oh, well, I'm going to churn because of it. The reality is that all of us have those on the back end, things that they need to watch out for. You either say them beforehand and win rapport and trust and win a deal for the right reasons, or you don't and you inherit the heartburn of the person running into it on the back end. So you want to almost win at the altar, but for the right reasons. Otherwise it's not winning at the altar, right? So I bring those things up beforehand, and this will establish more rapport with you. Usually in most of the case scenarios where I've done this, people are like more ready to buy after I tell them, because they, again, know that I am taking care of them. End of quarter discounts, they've got to go. You're just broadcasting to your buyer. Again, 2 things. You have no idea what problems they want to solve and why they would want to buy. And so you're like lowering the price tag to try and bait them in. And also that you could have discounted the entire time, but you didn't until you weren't getting the sale. So you're showing them that they can't trust you. Giving a fake sense of buy-in. I see this a lot within multi-decision makers. They're like, yeah, I talked to Linda and Linda's really excited about this. And the person talks to Linda and Linda's like, I don't even really know what they were talking about. So this happens a lot in selling within committees. You always want to represent the truth. Either represent the truth or don't say it, right? So it's kind of like, data, if it's questionable, if is some kind of questionable data in the batch, the whole batch is bad. So I would tell the truth, of people's level of buy-in if you're going to mention it. False compliments, giving people compliments along the way, some work related, some not work related, just because you're trying to get them to like you, to push the deal across the line. Not mentioning product shortcomings, saying it's on the roadmap when it's really not. Asking, and this is all going to come down to asking questions. If you go into episode 1, I go very deep into this topic. But asking any kind of questions that are a game to get them to opt in, to say yes as a trick, big no-no. Very big no-no. And I feel like I'm going to get 4,000 hate mails for the, in-mails for this. I can already see them coming. But asking questions in a way that is leading them, what if questions? What if you could do this? Imagine if you could do this. Would you say that you're doing this? Chris Voss would actually call this somewhat of a yes trap. But asking any kind of questions that's leading them to a yes to yes to yes to yes to yes, to where the ultimate answer is yes. Big no-no. If you're leading them anywhere, if you're trying to manipulate them into anything, again, if you're going to do it, stop posting on LinkedIn saying that you don't know why people see salespeople as sleazy. You are. One or the other. But I would suggest it's one, don't ask these. Have your questions be after understanding them and diagnosing your problems. It will help you as a seller. I cannot tell you how much this has alleviated me from the emotional perspective, knowing that I'm truly after their problems, not thinking of the next question that I should ask. So a good litmus test for this is if you're thinking of a question while they're talking, what next question to ask them, you're leading them somewhere. If they answer a question and you immediately after can't remember the answer, it's because you're leading them somewhere. So stacking questions, qualifying questions, leading questions, agenda-driven questions, duh questions like, do you want to lose weight? Do you want more money? Do you want to be more successful? Where the answer is duh. Pain selling standalone. This is a big one. Very, very big one in selling. If you're pain selling standalone, you're getting them to mention their pain, how long it's been going on, how long it's been impacting them, so that you can rile them up emotionally and emotionally manipulate them into feeling like they should buy more. Now, pain questions are necessary. Every doctor asks them, what's hurting? How long has it been hurting? But then they ask a litany of other questions to diagnose the problem to help the person. So if we're asking pain questions, heaven forbid, stand alone, have you tried to do anything about it? Has that worked? You are bending the mind of the buyer in a way to where they feel like they should buy more. You need to be in that room after uncovering, should they buy at all? And what should they buy based on the problem that they're having? Not just getting the pain data so you can increase the likelihood of a sale. On a side note, problem-centric selling will help your numbers. So the odd thing is the one who doesn't want the ring is the one who gets the ring, right? But asking pain-centric questions stand alone, you're just bending the buyer's mind, and they can feel it. They can feel it in that room. They know what you're doing to them. That's why they clam up. It's why they won't give you details about their business. It's why you find out later that you are being compared against a competitor. That's why you find out information on a call of things that mattered to them, because they won't give it to you because they do not trust you, because they shouldn't trust you. So pain selling, if we're doing anything to emotionally manipulate them, to feel more heard, to be more human, to be more empathetic, so that they open up. For what? So we can take the information and drive the sale home? No, solve their problems. Be after that. Be aggressive, but be aggressive after that. Having the agenda to sell versus understand and fix their problems. That sums it all up. These are all techniques, but that's the main one. So I want to go into how to counteract some of these sales perceptions now. I know this has been a long episode. We're almost through it. So the first thing you need to counteract is that you're lying within sales. So you need to prove that you're not withholding information. How you can do this: telling them when and if you wouldn't buy their product if it was you, telling them something that your company doesn't focus on, downselling when appropriate, telling them something your company doesn't do well, showing them how you would buy your product if it was you. So if your family called you to get the family discount to optimize, for price, how would you do it then? So I do this with my customers all the time. I'm like, they tell me that they want something. I'm like, honestly, I would just watch these 4 videos. They're free. That might get you there. I think that will get you there for what you're looking for. They look at me with their jaws on the floor. I'm like, that's what I would do if I were you. It's free. Yes. You just have to put in your business email. Use that in your one-on-ones, and then, maybe later we can talk about this stuff, but that's the paid option. So I'm like, here's the free option. So showing them how you would buy and apologizing for something that you genuinely did wrong. These are all antidotes to proving to them that you're telling the truth. So when you're telling them something that's correct, I wouldn't Eeyore it, but that's correct, of when you wouldn't buy the product, that's going to win rapport with them. Countering number 2, that you are lying and that you are asking questions to try to trick them. So this is we need to counter this. And the antidote to that is not asking the wrong questions. So essentially, again, I would go into episode 1. I cover this very, very in depth, but I have with them, but without them questions, meaning leading questions, at them questions, meaning you're accusing them of something or putting an action going at them, from them, where you're taking something from them at their expense, to them, meaning you're getting deploying a technique to them, to try and get something from them or emotionally manipulate them. All of those have to go. Do ask understanding-based questions and what you are trying to understand. I'm like, why did we call it discovery call? Because we need to discover what is going on. What is the problem? The only thing we're discovering is that we're talking about our product the entire time and that we have no knowledge set about our buyer. Currently, I'm saying this out of genuine and complete, overwhelming love, admiration, and respect for sales. We have to ask these questions. This is our responsibility. This is our obligation to our buyers, is to ask these questions and to help them by way of solving their problems. Number 3, countering that you are unable to help, or that you're unable to help them. So people see salespeople as they don't have an ability. So how we can counter that is by identifying a problem, diagnosing a problem, and proving that you can help them as opposed to saying it. So there are 5 types of selling. I go into this very deep in, I believe, episode 9. There's product-centric selling, feature-centric selling, benefit-centric selling, pain-centric selling, problem-centric selling, all 1 through 4 big no-nos. All 1 through 4, 99.9% of sales reps are doing. So product-centric selling is you're talking about your products primarily in demo. Feature, you're talking about your features primarily in demo. Benefit, same thing, save time, save money, more time, more money. And pain-centric selling, you're just trying to get the pain out of the person to manipulate them into want to buy more. So these first 3 cases is as if a patient walks into a doctor's office, I as a doctor ask them 0 questions, and I start describing 5 different products or medications, the features of those medications, or the benefits of those medications, like you might lose weight, you might sleep better, to try to get the patient to buy more. And the problem with that is you don't know what's wrong. Pain-centric, same thing. Patient walks in, I ask them pain-centric questions only. What hurts? How long has it been hurting? What's the impact of that at home? I can't pick up little Timmy. Well, my son, little Timmy, what's the impact of that? Well, I'm feeling emotional distance between me and my son. Okay, great. Well, wouldn't you think that you need to use this medication? Because you're trying to get them to buy the medication. What's wrong there? You still don't know the problem. You don't know what they're trying to solve for. So you have no idea what you're trying to alleviate or what will alleviate for them. Our expertise in sales should be, most often isn't, solving their problems. We're not product experts. Otherwise, we'd be on the product team or we'd be a solutions engineer. But this is contextualizing for our buyer, uncovering if they have a problem so we can solve that problem for them. Number 4, counteracting the belief that you can't reliably deliver. This is common about sales, I'd argue, because it's based on people's experience. How we can counteract that is knowing them and proving that you can deliver based on that knowledge set. So some things that you need to know about your buyer. Here's a pretty exhaustive list. But I go into this in the episode, the one thing to gain that you need to gain your buyer's trust. But it's knowing your buyer's metrics, knowing your buyers, what their common problems and challenges are, what's relevant to them statically, meaning, their industry segment or industry vertical, what's going on with them in relation to you, meaning they downloaded content or attended a webinar or they, requested a demo but didn't schedule one. Knowing what's going on with your buyer, not in relationship to you, of like they IPO'd or they just received company funding or they just acquired another company or they just moved headquarters or locations, if that maps to what your product does. And then knowing your buyer for your buyer, so essentially personalizing to them. But these are all the things that I would know about my buyer so I can communicate to them that I can reliably deliver because I do know who they are and what they're probably trying to solve for. So when I get into discovery and I'm uncovering all those things that they need to solve for, they can trust that I can deliver. So in summary, I know that this is a very weighty episode emotionally, or it was for me, but I say it with the most earnest intent and the most true utmost respect for this profession. We have an opportunity. That opportunity is to have our buyers back and to solve their problems and to really make an impact to their world for the positive. So we need to start at certainly table stakes in the nascent stage of that relationship by not blowing trust with them, by misleading them or not telling them the truth. So that is everything. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this session, you want to see more just like it, if you go to flipthescript.co, and we have a bunch of different sessions on anything and everything sales. And if you really like this, if you want to go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn and give us a follow, we punt out about 3 tips per week. But either way, thank you so much for tuning in today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day prospecting.
Watch out.